What's up, everybody, and welcome back to First Fruits of Zion Reacts. Today we're going to be looking at Dinesh D'Souza, and he's talking about Israel. So that's good. We want to hear people talk about Israel. Hopefully he's got something nice to say. Before we do that, I should remind you that if you go to FFOZ.org and create a free account, you can just get tons and tons of free content from a Messianic Jewish perspective. That's the perspective you want if you want to understand your Bible. So try that. Open a new tab and do that. Let the video play. You can do more than one thing at a time. All right, let's see what's happening here in this video.
I mean, one of the things that I was so shocked by, and this can lead to a bit of a broader question about Christian relations with Israel, is that at Charlie Kirk's memorial service, I actually knew Charlie personally and was really deeply shocked by what happened. He spoke at the event and basically said that what happened to Charlie reminds him of what happened to Jesus, where some people in a dark lamplit room eating hummus planned to kill him. Now, first of all,
this is Tucker Carlson at the memorial service. Yeah, that was bizarre. That was bizarre. It seemed really anti-Semitic to me. Because I might even go beyond stating it as an opinion and just say, that's an anti-Semitic thing to say. Shame on Tucker Carlson.
Analogy doesn't work because it wasn't the powers that be killing him. It was a student that killed him.
When we read so I'm not to minimize Judas's culpability there. Two things real quick though. I know we haven't even gotten to Dinesh D'Souza yet. This is someone else. But when you read through the Gospels, there were powerful people that wanted Jesus out of the picture because what he's claiming to do, his gospel message is repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, right? The kingdom of heaven is the restored Jewish monarchy. It's the Davidic kingdom that comes back, and it's there in the land of Israel. It's a real physical kingdom with the Messiah, Jesus, on the throne. And that offer is still on the table, and it will happen. It was promised by all the prophets. It's the fulfillment of God's covenant with David, and it has to happen. And there were powerful people that didn't want that to happen. The Herodians obviously wouldn't have wanted that because they had real political power. Real as far as it went. They were puppets of Rome, but they had wealth at least, and they had power, as much power as Rome let them have. The Sadducees didn't want a Messiah figure because they were their bread was buttered also by the system, the Roman system, and the Herodian system. They were corrupt, and of course the Messiah coming in and taking over and instituting justice, right? This would have been bad for the Sadducees. So there were people in dark rooms talking about talking about how to get rid of Jesus. I would also add really quickly that putting the culpability on Judas it can also lead to anti-Semitic tropes. Judas, look at Renaissance art of the disciples. You find Judas is the Jewy looking one, so that can also be a stereotype that we want to avoid. I don't know why I got into all that. It's probably not the point of this video, but I calls them like I sees them, I guess.
Secondly, it was so clearly trying to, I think, point the blame at the Jews. He can try and play innocent and, no, I didn't mean that. But come on. I mean, he knows how the game works, and he had plausible deniability there. And the reason why I mentioned this is because is it not possible that, it's two questions. Number one, is it possible that perhaps what's going on with Tucker is he's drawing on sadly, there's a tradition in Europe of, there's been a Christian hate persecution towards Jews due to certain theological views, which you don't really see so much in Christianity in America, thank God. Could that be what's going on there with him? And that would lead to my second question, which is, how does your Christian faith not lead you to have that kind of relationship with Jews and Israel that sometimes has been there in history?
Yeah, good question.
Now, this is a case
I've thrown a lot at you, by the way.
No. And this is, in fact, a profound question that engages theology and of course, history. This is a topic I have thought about a lot. I've written 3 books on Christian apologetics. About a decade ago, I did a number of debates with leading atheists around the world, people like Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins. So this is a territory I actually know a lot better than someone like Tucker. Now, I
love the competence.
Debate as it's framed in the United States today is between sort of 2 strands of esoteric theology. One is called dispensationalism, which is a reading within Protestantism of the end times. Like, it is an attempt to decipher from the book of Revelation that this will happen and this will happen and this will happen after that. This is the dispensational unfolding.
Yeah, that's how most of us encounter dispensationalism. It's not, I wouldn't say it's how I necessarily would define it, but just that's because I was a hardcore dispensationalist, like in high school and for years after that. When you watch Christian television and you see the dispensationalists on there, like Jack Van Impe, Hal Lindsey, these kind of guys, that is what they talk about, though. It's all about end times, signs of the times, and we are seeing some signs of the times here at the time of this recording. Go start a Torah club or join a Torah club. You can go to endofdays.org and do that. We've already started through this study track, but you can gain so much from going and doing that right now, because we all have a lot to learn about the end of days. I would add on to what he said and say, actually, dispensationalism goes back into the past as well. So there's the dispensation with Adam and Eve in the garden. That looks different than the dispensation before the flood, but after the exile from the garden. There's a dispensation after the flood, but before the giving of the law. And there's a dispensation of law after the Sinai event. So dispensationalism is it is a full systematic theology. And it answers more questions than just questions about the end times. And I would say even one of the deeper questions that dispensationalists try to answer as they're trying to make sense of the Bible and the narrative story from beginning to end, the whole like, what is God doing in the world? That critically it answers questions about who God's people are. And God's people during the dispensation of law was Israel. God's people during the dispensation of grace is the church. And critically, dispensationalists believe that Israel or the Jewish people will be God's people again. Like they're maybe sitting on the bench now, but their role isn't over, which is a great improvement from many other streams of theology. Of course, here at First Fruit Design, we would say that even right now, the Jewish people are God's people, that never changed. So yeah, he's not wrong that dispensationalists talk about the end times a lot, because that's probably it's the most sensational thing that they talk about. It's exciting, it's timely, or feels timely, and it's one of the things that really distinguishes them a lot from other systematic theologies. But I thought I'd just say more about it because learning is fun.
The other esoteric idea is called replacement theology. And the simple idea here is that the New Testament or the Christian scriptures replace the Jewish scriptures and, in a sense, make them obsolete. I think
I've heard it described that way. I've heard it described that way by prominent theologians. And when the rubber meets the road, if you're a Christian and you're approaching the Bible devotionally, that is essentially what it looks like, right? You're not reading Leviticus and thinking God asked me to do all these things. You're reading Ephesians or Galatians or Luke, right? You're reading a New Testament book. And all of that together describes the high calling to which we aspire with God's help as disciples of Jesus, whereas the commandments of the Old Testament are thought not to do so. Here at First Fruit Design, we emphasize a different aspect of replacement theology. I think probably on a deeper level, replacement theology is the idea that the Jewish people were replaced as the people of God by the Christian church. And we emphasize this in part because it's possible to recover the Old Testament, recover the Torah, right? Even recover the Mosaic Law, and to be thinking very seriously about it as something that's still in force, which it is. But to miss that it was given to Israel, to miss the centrality of the people of Israel in God's plan. And if that is missed, we're still in replacement theology territory. So just to add on again to what he said, he's giving a brief answer, whereas I have all the time in the world to go into more detail.
That this is a false dichotomy, because there is in fact a mainstream Christian tradition going back 2,000 years. Now, like all traditions, it evolves, but it evolves around a kind of a mainline path. And the mainline path was established very early in the Christian scriptures, something called the Acts of the Apostles, where the Apostle Paul, who is the apostle to the Gentiles, to the non-Jews, is bringing all these non-Jews into become followers of Jesus. And Jesus's actual apostles are annoyed because they say, you can't do this. Jesus was a Jew, and anybody who wants to follow Jesus needs to become a Jew first, and then follow Jesus, because Jesus is coming out of the Jewish root. And so
he's talking about Acts 15. So just to clarify here, it's possible that some of the 12 would have said this, would have said, no, you have to become Jewish. It may have even been the prevailing view. What we know is that in Acts 15, starting in verse 1, some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, which means becoming Jewish, and we don't have time to get into that right now, but that's what it means, you cannot be saved. And so we don't know exactly who these men are. When we go down to verse 5, we find some believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees rose up and said, it is necessary to circumcise them, and make them Jewish, and to order them to keep the law of Moses. Where the apostles, where all of them fell on this issue, that's not recorded. We know where Paul and Barnabas stood, and Dinesh was right about that. Peter was with them as well, because he had had the encounter with Cornelius by this point, and he knew that Gentiles were being let in. But yeah, this was the problem. Like, this was the central debate in the very early years of the church, which is what these Gentiles coming in, do they have to become Jewish? That's actually, it's in my experience, kind of rare for people to realize just how defining that debate was, and how many of the books of the New Testament really can only be understood in light of that debate, because those are the issues. Like, this is the issue that Paul hammers over and over again in his epistles. So I'm glad that Dinesh D'Souza knows this, and he's bringing this out as like a central issue in the New Testament. If you overlook it, then you read Paul's epistles and you're just pulling nonsense out, because you're not aware of what he's talking about: Jewish identity, Gentile identity in the body of Christ. So that's cool. I've heard of this guy's name before, and he's talking about this stuff. That makes me feel happy.
You need to adopt that root first, and only then can you consider yourself a Christian. Think of it. This was the view of all the 11 apostles, 11, of course, minus Judas. So there's a meeting between Paul and the apostles to hash it out. And they do hash it out, and they come out with a very simple answer. And that is that these new Christians, the Gentiles, do not in fact have to be circumcised, or they do not have to keep the Sabbath, and they don't have to follow some of the Jewish rituals. But guess what? They have to take everything else. They have to adopt the Genesis account of creation. They have to adopt the Exodus. They have to adopt the Ten Commandments. They have to adopt the Psalms. They have to adopt the teaching of the prophets. All of it. is incorporated into Christianity. And this is the
This is startlingly accurate for such a high-profile person. Very, very good. Very, very good summary. The things having to do specifically with Jewish identity were not put on Gentiles, and this includes strict Sabbath observance. When he talks about some of the ritual things, it includes circumcision. It includes probably tefillin, tzitzit, things like that really signify Jewish identity, signs of the Sinai covenant. But it was a massive shift for Gentiles coming into the Jesus movement to abandon idolatry, to believe only in the Genesis creation accounts. This means that there's no room for any of their gods, and all of what went with that, all the lifestyle changes, the whole Jewish worldview, really, they had to adopt. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff.
Reason, by the way, why, if you look at the Christian Bible, the first half of it, in fact, the longer part, is in fact the Hebrew scriptures, and then the shorter part is the New Testament. So you can see right here that the mainstream of Christianity was built on an incorporation and not an abrogation, right? In Islam, there's a doctrine of abrogation where the later verses cancel out the earlier verses. There's no such doctrine in Christianity. So I think
that's great. I think I think it probably depends on which expression of Christianity. I'm hopeful that that if you dig into the catechisms of the major denominations, that this is what you'll find. Like, technically we don't abrogate their Old Testament. There are often workarounds, like dispensationalists, for example. Most of them eat pork. But they would also say, like, well, the Old Testament, wasn't, it's not abrogated. They would say, Jesus didn't come to abrogate it, but there's a theological workaround somewhere where it's like, well, he fulfilled it or something, like some systematic theological framework is built to make the Torah functionally abrogated. One of the things that we try to do at First Zion is to explain how that's not biblical. It hasn't been abrogated at all. The issue is it was given to the Jewish people. It wasn't given to, if you're a Gentile, it wasn't given to you. Nevertheless, it has much to say to you, as he's been talking about. All of what it represents as far as teaching us the difference between righteousness and sinfulness. The Torah does that. The Torah does it more clearly and more thoroughly than any other part of the Bible. So that's what we believe.
What I'm getting at here is somebody who not only cares about conservatism, but cares about Christianity, is that this whole idea of replacement theology, I think, is really an abomination. It's an abomination to the mainstream understanding of Christianity. I agree, through the centuries, there are people who have adopted this kind of rhetoric, basically to try to create an anti-Jewish Christianity. And it does seem like these new Pied Pipers are drawing on those threads. But I want to emphasize that the mainstream of Christianity is represented by, I think it was Pope John Paul II, who visited Israel, and he made this statement. He said, "It is the Holy Land for everybody, but it is the promised land only to the Jews." And this is, again, this is not Protestant dispensationalism coming from the Pope. This is the mainstream understanding of Christianity, Catholic.
On the one hand, if he's thinking of like Marcion, right? Marcion is an influential person in the church. What exact century? I don't want to mislead anybody. He's earlier than that. Second century. So Marcion did get rid of the Old Testament, right? And he said, well, all we need now is some of the New Testament. And he did try to make an anti-Jewish, a completely de-Judaized version of Christianity. And he was rejected. So on the one hand, Dinesh is correct. We have these extreme movements very early in the church to get rid of anything that looks Jewish in the Bible. And these were rejected, and we ended up incorporating the entire Tanakh, the entire Jewish Bible, into the Christian Bible. Very, very good. Very, providential that happened. I mean, we would be lost without the Old Testament. Now, when you look at that statement by the Pope, that it's the promised land, Israel's the promised land for the Jewish people, I think depending on where you are in church history temporally, like if you go back to Crusader times, I don't think the popes then were saying that. What we see in Pope John Paul II is the culmination of many years of reflection, and there has been a shift in Christian theology, particularly since the Holocaust, where there's been a reassessment of the role of the Jewish people in God's plan. There's been a reassessment of the land of Israel and its theological significance. There's been a lot of Jewish Christian dialogue. There's been, apologies have happened, for centuries and centuries of Christian persecution of Jews. I think you can probably go back through and find a thread of good theology that he's referring to as this main line. I'm not sure that it was always out in front. I think there's been periods of history where that we have to own up to as Christians, where it was anti-Jewish. It was very anti-Semitic. So my view's not quite as rosy as his in this particular area. My assessment of Christian history is a little more sanguine.
Protestant both.
And that presumably for you is what grounds you in your faith in support for Israel and the Jewish people.
I want to add something that I forgot to say a second ago, which was that hearing him say that replacement theology is an abomination. That's correct. Replacement theology is terrible. It's unbiblical. The Jewish people are still God's people, and whether or not you can go find this idea throughout the centuries of Christian theology, that question aside, I'm really glad to have prominent voices repudiating replacement theology. We love to see it. We love to see it here at First Zion. When Jesus comes back and is ruling from Jerusalem, there's not going to be any more replacement theologians. It's going to be clear to everybody, but we want it to be clear to people now, because it matters. Your stance on Israel matters. Your stance on the Jewish people matters. You don't want to find yourself on the wrong side of an apocalyptic end times battle. That would be bad.
Well, my support is built on three pillars or three layers. You just mentioned the theological level. That's one of them. The second one, I would call it the cultural or moral level. And that is just a simple understanding that Western civilization and what is best about it, what makes it a civilization that I, as a guy who grows up in India, would want to emigrate to and become a part of. Western civilization, the philosopher Leo Strauss says, is built on the twin foundations of Athens and Jerusalem. Athens is a little more obvious. It's Socrates, it's free speech. It is the Greek theater. It is Pericles and the idea of democracy. It is ultimately, I think, the roots of modern science. But people forget what Jerusalem is all about. Jerusalem is about Jefferson's assertion that our rights come from our Creator. Jerusalem is about a moral code in the universe that exists independent of us, that make claims on us. The Ten Commandments is a good stand-in for that code. I don't think that our civilization would have its dynamism and strength without both Athens and Jerusalem. You can't kick out one pillar and have the edifice still standing. So that's the second reason I want to protect Athens and Jerusalem both.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's not hard to see if you start, there's people out there talking about Judaism all the time and they don't like it. These are people that I think, Christians. And I'm always sad to see that, because he's right that like the foundation of, if you want to talk about the Christian West or whatever, however you want to put it, the moral foundations, insofar as they are good and resilient, are Jewish ideas. They all come from the Bible. They all come from really, the roots are deep in the Old Testament. And I think there's a lot to be gained from seeing the Jewish foundation of the Christian faith, seeing the Jewish and how Christianity was influential in shaping the values of our culture, and to be able to trace that all the way back to the Jewish people and the revelation they received from the God of Israel, that should give us, it should give us a remarkable respect for the Jewish people, for Israel, for even Jewish tradition and Jewish exegesis and Jewish jurisprudence. These are all, these are all things we should at least be interested in and respectful of, and be able to respectfully dialogue about. So yeah, it's good.
Third reason is more political. It's realpolitik. It's more strategic. It's simply based on the idea that Israel is on the front lines of fighting radical Islam. Israel is really good at it. Why? I think in part because Israel lives in a really bad neighborhood, and people who live in a bad neighborhood develop a real situational awareness. They're always looking over their shoulder. They're closer to survival, and therefore they've got a sort of cannier understanding of situation on the ground. America is looking at radical Islam in some ways from a long distance away, at least prior to attempts to infiltrate America by radical Islam itself, which is ongoing. But America's record in dealing with radical Islam, from pulling the rug out from the Shah of Iran and helping us get Khomeini, from clobbering the Taliban, but then the Taliban comes back, from the war in Iraq, the American record is checkered or mixed at best. And so I say, hey, when Israel is doing such a fantastic job of fighting terrorism, by the way, not just in the West Bank and Gaza, but in Sudan and Yemen and Qatar and Iran, there's an overwhelming strategic argument for the United States backing and being allied with Israel. So I see these as three independent arguments for supporting Israel. Each of them would stand in some senses on its own, but put together, it makes a strong case.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll let any Israelis comment. If you're Israeli and you're watching this, you can comment down below. I have no idea how you feel about that sentiment. For us here at First Fruits Design, I would say that it's really similar to something we might say. And in fact, probably many of us on staff would say the exact same thing he does. For me, I'm not thinking, even geopolitically, I'm not, because of being a follower of Jesus, the Jewish King. Really, I'm looking at it from not so much an America-centric worldview, like Israel's gonna keep Islam from infiltrating America or something like that. For me, like, Israel is where it's at. Like, Israel is the important location. Israel is the important location of the Bible. When we think about Islam, right? And they came through and they conquered the land of Israel in the 600s. They conquered it from the Byzantines. And they conquered all, a lot of other stuff, all of North Africa, and they made it all the east quite a ways. And they really, through just military force, the jihad, they conquered all of this stuff. And they have this theological idea that it's theirs forever now, right? They conquered Spain, right? They call it Al-Andalus or something. To them, this is like, if they can't lose that territory theologically, once it's theirs, they don't really, there's not a theological mechanism for them to let go of it, as far as I understand from the former Muslims that I've talked to. Maybe we'll throw a link to a podcast interview that we've had with Danny Bermawi down there in the notes there in the video description. So I don't see Israel as being on the front lines of the West versus Islam so much as I see really Israel being the central location that we need to pay attention to in terms of biblical prophecy, in terms of what God is doing in the world, right? When you have this massive religion, Islam, with so much territory, so many people, so much resources, that have an idea in their mind that they own the land of Israel, and that's a deep theological belief that is theirs. I didn't have that belief about America, I don't think, not in the same way, at least. And then you have the Jewish people who are promised that land that was promised to their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's their only that's the only place they got. They were never, everywhere else they've gone, they've been, it hasn't gone well for them in the long term. They're doing well in America, and I hope that continues to be the case, because every country that turns against the Jews eventually gets pulverized. But hey, that's a good reason to support the Jewish people. That's a really good reason. Yeah, the conflict as I see it is, it's the Jewish people versus everyone who feels entitled to take their land from them. And right now, that's the Islamic world. In the Crusader times, it was the Christian world. And I hope that Christians can move past that, and that they can relinquish any weird theological claims they have on the land of Israel. So when you turn it around in that way, and Israel is the focal point rather than the West or America, we sort of have a choice to make as human beings, right? If it's Israel versus everyone else, we want to be on Israel's side. And I guess this goes back really to theological reasons. But maybe I'm just not very good at international geopolitics, I'm not very good at realpolitik. Realpolitik means that if the Islamic world offers you enough money or leverage or power, you would give up Israel, right? I mean, that's realpolitik. So you got to be careful with pure pragmatism being a reason to support Israel, because the international geopolitical situation can change. But I'm glad I gave the other two reasons, because even the theological reasons are enough. And if you can come up with some more, that's great. That's great. But like I said, you don't want to find yourself on the wrong side of the war of Gog and Magog or anything like that. You want to stand with the Jewish people. And there are many good reasons to support Israel. Glad Dinesh D'Souza supports Israel. And I'm glad he's against replacement theology. Well, I think it's about all we have time for today. Just as a reminder, if you go to FFOZ.org, you can learn everything that we have to teach you. And what that is you will learn your Bible from a Messianic Jewish perspective. I've found it helpful, seminary trained, and I found First Fruits Design materials possibly the most helpful in the world, just for someone to start getting a handle on what the Bible says, what it means. So go ahead and do that. I encourage you to do that. And with all that said, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.